Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. The first question I'd like to ask you, tomorrow is the first Anglo-French summit in 5 years. You said last year that France and the UK can't have a good relationship, and that some of that was down to Boris Johnson. Does Rishi Sunak being in number 10 change things?
Yes, I think it changed things, and I think the Windsor framework is very important because there was tension around this question of the Northern Ireland Protocol and the fact that Boris Johnson signed it and was not ready to implement it. So that was important for the relationship with the EU, but also with France, of course, because we supported the EU. And probably it will be easier with Rishi Sunak because he's more pragmatic and there is no passive in a certain way. So yes, and well, 5 years without a summit, it's the first time. And so it's good that there is this reset.
So, I mean, it will be a huge moment. From the UK's perspective, the Prime Minister is going into this summit knowing that one of the key things for him is a returns agreement with France when it comes to those cross-channel crossings, illegal migration. How likely do you think a returns agreement is?
Well, it's going to be the most difficult part because there's going to be agreement on cooperation on nuclear energy, climate change, defense cooperation and Ukraine, but it will be more difficult on these questions. It has always been tense, and even when I was ambassador to London, there were crises. But at that time, we had cooperation, and we closed the tunnel and the port of Calais. Now it's more difficult because it's 100 kilometers of coast. And I think we've done a lot together, but well, of course, we want to do more. The return might be difficult because we have more asylum seekers than the British, in fact, and also it's migration is a problem in every country from a domestic point of view. So I don't know what the outcome will be. I know that we are ready to have also a multi-year financing program, and with this important cooperation and also the use of drones or thermal cameras.
How important is migration as a political issue in France?
Well, it is important, of course, because you know that the far right has been elected in the parliament, and so they are very vocal on this issue.
And in terms of the legislation that the UK government has proposed this week, the illegal migration bill, what does that do to the UK-French relationship? Does it improve it? Does it threaten it? I mean, some people say it threatens security in Europe.
Well, I think it's not only a French problem, I think, and there's been reaction also of the NGOs and the Labour Party in the UK. Well, we obviously don't want to take them back. And also there is another issue, because I understand that you don't want to take illegal migrants, but at the same time, they are not safe routes for those who would like to seek for asylum. They could be processed in France, and so it is not the case.
And in terms of the summit more broadly, I've set out there what the UK government, part of what the UK government is hoping to achieve over the weekend. What is France's major hope for this summit?
You know, in fact, Macron wanted the UK to participate more in European affairs, and that's the reason why Liz Truss has been invited to the European community, political community in Prague. And so that's his view, that we should cooperate more, in particular on defense issues. There are some projects, and we have exchanges also of officers. Recently, there was a big and very important drills in France, and there was the participation of the British, and also because it's a summit of reconciliation in a certain way. When I was ambassador to London, I created this young leaders program, and I think it's important that young people could know each other better. But there are other issues such as nuclear energy, because we participate, of course, in Hinkley Point and in Sizewell see in the future. Climate change issues, and I think there's a lot to discuss together. We are permanent members of the Security Council, so we share a lot, and also we are nuclear powers, and so I think there's a lot to do together, and it's not a normal situation not to have a relationship with its closest neighbor.
Yes, no, quite. You mentioned defence there. I mean, in the context of the war in Ukraine, defence comes up a lot more in this country at the moment, particularly questions about whether the British military is still as capable, perhaps, as it once was. What's the French view of the British armed forces and how capable and strong and resilient they are at the moment?
Well, it's I think it's the closest cooperation we had in the past. And there is still this joint combined force of 10,000 people. And we think it's a very good army. We are very similar in a way. I think the war in Ukraine raised some problems because it was, our army were destined to intervene in operation or peacekeeping operation, and so it's not a high-intensity war. Doesn't mean that we will have one in Europe because we are members of NATO. But I think there should be a reflection on both sides how to strengthen our army and to prepare it for different times.
You were the French ambassador to Russia, and you said in 2020 that when you had met Vladimir Putin, he didn't seem like he was in the mood to engage in a war, not certainly the type that he's since kicked off in Ukraine. What do you think changed for him in such a short space of time?
Well, I think that was the COVID, because he was mentally isolated, physically, because he was afraid. He had a kind of phobia of the COVID and contagious illness. And so he didn't speak to international leaders. He was frustrated because he couldn't organize the parade of the 9th of May 2020. He even invited a lot of people, including Trump, who said at that time that he would come. Maybe the administration wouldn't be happy about that. But anyway, it's something he prepared for years, and he was frustrated. And afterwards, he talked only to the FSB. And the FSB said that it would be an easy victory. It was not even discussed with the army. And I remember even I said that in 2020, but also, yes, it was 2020, also because I attended the meeting in Brégançon, where is Putin, Macron and Putin. And at that time, they discussed the Minsk process. They were ready to relaunched it, and also Putin, for the first time, accepted to meet with Zelensky in Paris. And so, we thought that he was not thinking of war, even if, he has obsession, the fact that he doesn't like the Ukraine being independent, or he's very... he is resentful about the West and NATO and so on. But I think at that time he was not planning a war. So I think the isolation, complete isolation, had a very dangerous effect on him.
Yeah. And in terms of where this war goes now, how do you think this ends? Is there a political solution that you can see that Putin could be involved in?
Well, for the time being, it's impossible because, Zelensky wants to retake all the occupied territories, meaning including Crimea. For Putin, the war has become existential as well, and it's impossible to lose in Crimea. There's going to be offensive and counter-offensive. And I think, well, it will be decided probably on the battlefield. At some point, we will come back to the negotiation table, of course, but the time is not ripe for that. And discussing with Putin or not, I mean, if the leader of Russia, the head of state of Russia, you negotiate with your enemy, with your adversary, not with your friends. So it's a possibility, but it's really too early to say.
Yeah. I want to just come back to your time in London, because you were here during the period of the Brexit vote, the immediate aftermath. I know you've written about how it felt at the time, how it felt afterwards. But just looking at the UK-French relationship now, with some years in between that Brexit vote, just sum up for us, how do the French see the UK, and what's that future relationship like?
I think it's a real reset. I think because of Brexit, relationship were very, very bad. I think it was the lowest level of trust during this period. And of course, it has been aggravated by some remarks, of course, we know by Boris Johnson, but also mistrust when asked, well, if she considered Macron as a friend or foe, and she answered, the jury is out. Of course, it shows that there is no trust. But I think what is most important is also the implementation of the agreements. And so since there is a compromise concerning the Northern Ireland Protocol, meaning, well, the Windsor framework, I think it can improve things. And so I think there's some perspective. And again, I think it's easier for Emmanuel Macron, who is a man of detail, like his Rishi Sunak, to get along and to find some compromises.
Yeah. And just finally, I'd like to ask you a more personal question, I suppose, because you were forced to retire because of a mandatory retirement age, but you were in an incredible job. You were, you know, you have had an incredible career, and I know that that continues, but you were sort of asked to leave a job which I imagine you probably didn't want to. How do you feel about that now, reflecting back on it?
Well, of course, I didn't want to leave. I didn't have the choice. I would have continued forever, at least for a long time, in Russia or otherwhere. You know, there is the representative of the Vatican, and he told me that retirement age for them is 75. And so I said I envied him. But no, anyway, I'm not. I don't really understand what's happening now, in particular with young people, because they're thinking of their retirement before thinking of what they could do, how they could contribute to the world or to the society. It's something that I don't understand. And I still think I understand when it's a difficult job and when it's not an interesting job, but a lot of people have interesting jobs, and well, I wish I could have continued. Well, now I'm doing other things, which I find also, and it's also possible to to transmit what you done in the past. That's the reason why I published my memoirs just a few months ago, and I wrote before, as you know, China in Deporters and Goodbye Britannia, which interestingly enough has been translated in English by Au revoir Britannia.
Well, I asked that
is Goodbye Britannia in the French, and the English one is Au revoir Britannia.
Well, I ask you because obviously there are huge protests in France at the minute. You referenced them there about the retirement age. I wonder just finally whether you think it makes things harder for women, because often it can take women a little bit longer to reach their career peak. And I suppose if you're forced to retire at the same age, it can make things more difficult.
That's absolutely what I think. And that's what I wrote about China in particular, because retirement age was 55 for women and 60 for men. And now I think it has been prolonged. But the fact is, well, the end of your career is the best part. And so, well, it would be impossible for women to have career as good as for men. So I don't think it's necessarily an advantage when you have to retire earlier.
Thank you so much, Sylvie. It's been lovely to speak to you.
Thank you very much.